What makes a successful language learner? In the following videos, 6 highly proficient language learners discuss what characteristics made them successful at language learning.
Also, it's hard when you're first here, you want to minister and you can't speak the language, and it's frustrating because you just want to say things to them, you want to communicate the love of Christ. But I think changing your perspective and thinking, okay, my learning their language, humbling myself to look like a complete idiot sometimes, can communicate the love of Christ to them, that I'm willing to come here and do the difficult thing of learning their language. And so I think we need to change our perspective and see that that can be ministry, and that can be a way to show them the love of Jesus.
Well, I did several of them. First of all, I always carried a notebook and a pencil with me. Now, I know we have iPhones now, but didn't have them then, and so I always carried in, I was writing down new words and phrases. When I talked to people, sometimes I'd write down things even if I already knew them, just because I could tell the person was interested that I was writing their words down. Maybe no one had ever written their words down before, and they were like, wow, I can teach this American. And it would make them, it would affirm them that they knew something that I didn't, and it made them more eager to talk to me again. So that's one thing I did. Another thing I did was I would read the local magazine. There was one publication in our language, and it was called Banawag. And Banawag had a lot of things I couldn't understand. I mean, it was hard slugging through the news and stuff, but there was a section right in the middle. Every week they had a section in the middle that had comics. And I would go to these comics, and I would read them. And I could tell by the expressions on the face what people were probably thinking, and I would get the slang. There was a lot of slang in there, and that's what I was hearing in the streets. And so I'd always read the comics, and then when I got good enough, I would switch and also read the love stories in there, because there's a lot of dialogue. And, you know, she said this, and he said that, and, oh, that's how you can abbreviate this, and that's how you say that. And so that helped me. Then I also listened to the Ilocano radio. There was no TV programs in Ilocano, but there was the radio. Another thing I did was I got the Ilocano Bible. I mean, everybody would get the Bible in the language they're learning, I'm sure. But then I looked to see what the Bible was translated like, and it was the Good News Bible. So then I went and bought the English Good News. And I put the two Bibles parallel, and I would read a story. I always centered on the stories at first, because the stories are easier to understand because there's back and forth. And then I'd read the story in English, and I'd think, well, I know that verse in English, and I'd painfully try and decipher it. After the first year, I put away my English Bible, and I only read my Ilocano Bible. I read the New Testament through twice every year and the Old Testament once every year. I underlined things, I marked things, I learned how to say things about turning people to the Lord and becoming followers of Jesus. I wore the Bible out so many times, 3 times I had to have it rebound because the pages were all coming out. But this became my beloved companion where I would go. There was no Bible, there was no phones with Bibles back then, of course. But, you know, now I would suggest that you get Bible.is on your phone. If you don't have this app, please get it. It is a free app, and everybody should have it who's learning the Bible. Bible.is. It will have your language on there in audio. So listen to it even now before you go to your country. Listen to it now, and try and follow the words. If you can't follow the words, then just get the sounds starting to come into your head, and that will help. And then you can read along with it if it's a language in letters that you can understand. And so I would do that. I didn't have that advantage back then, but another thing I did was I would make little routes of people that were, okay, this person is usually friendly and usually has time at this time of day, so I try and hit them up there. Sometimes I'd even borrow teammates' babies, because a white baby would always draw people. And so I'd take the baby out, talk about the baby, and then I'd return the hot and sweaty, hungry baby back to the mom, and I would study all those new words I'd learned. So I called it baby learning. Another thing I did was I would learn a song. I learned a Christian song that I could sing at the churches, but I also learned a Filipino love song. And they didn't sound like our love songs at all. And when I would sing that for them, just when I was hanging out with people, it was just a fun time, they'd be like, what? You know our old love songs? Like, no, they were just singing mostly English love songs by the time we were there, but they still knew their old love songs in their language. They thought that was so cool, and it just so endeared me to them when I could just sing it on the spot for them. And it was hard for me to learn it because it didn't sound like it had any tune that I could recognize, but you know, eventually I figured it out. And in singing, the thing that's cool about it is you lose your accent mostly. And so when they hear you sing, it's not so painful for them. And then they think, oh, that's so good. And then they hear you talk, oh, not so good. Oh, but you'll get it. And they encourage you, and then you're encouraged, and then you're like, okay, I can do this.
I like to know the technical side. I like to know book learning. So I would also study, because if I could find patterns, then I could use that and apply it to other situations. So I could up my learning. So I would have book study where I would I had a dictionary that at the front it shared basic grammar, and so I would just read that. Sometimes I would just look up random words. When I first started learning the language, smartphones weren't a really huge thing, and so I had an actual dictionary that was big that had Thai to English Thai, so I'd carry it everywhere. And sometimes if I was curious, I'd just look up a word, and while I looked up that word, I'd come upon other words, and so I'd just read. But also getting out and making friends and having relationships made practicing a lot easier instead of having to go and talk to random strangers, which the level of conversation is going to be the same. Hello, how are you? My name is, I'm from blah, blah, blah. But when you have a friend, it's like, oh, today I learned about family. So instead of going to a random stranger, my name is Kayla. I have 3 brothers. It wasn't as awkward. This person knows I'm learning the language, and so I could take whatever I was learning that day or that week and go and learn it, practice it with them. And so that helped a lot. And there was lots of laughs and using our hands to communicate and looking up words in the dictionary. But it was really a relationship building thing, which was really awesome.
I bought books. I bought French books that were self-teaching. You read a lesson, and there's a part in English and a part in French. It's translated, and then they walk you through these little quizzes. It's just 2 or 3 pages, kind of telling a story, so it's in context, so they'll teach you language around a certain context. I did that. I bought books, kids' books. I bought the Man Who Was Planting Apple Trees, that book, and then I bought The Little Prince, and I tried reading those. I did rote memorization, so I would pick a passage. This is what I learned from an online site from a guy who is a CEO of a language learning software similar to Rosetta. He said the best tried and true method is to memorize passages of text that are just a little bit beyond your comfort level and that are within reason, and to take a week to do it. So you memorize it over the course of 6 nights, sleeping on it every night, and then memorizing it throughout the day until you get it all down until you can say it perfectly by the 7th day. And then you do another one. And what I found, and I didn't do it that systematically, I didn't have a new passage every single week, but I did memorize some passages. And what I found is there's a lot of language that will come to your mind later on automatically when you memorize passages like this, because you memorize them in context. You don't just memorize vocab words. You memorize a context, a passage, a story, or a letter or something like that. And then because it's in context later on, you can apply the same words that you learned in there, 15, 20, 30 words or phrases in another context, and it just flows out. It's really amazing. So I did that. I also did a lot of conversation. I had about, in addition to the daily day-to-day conversation with people, I met with 3 different people for 2 hours apiece and just had French conversation with them purposefully.
I took all the tools that were at my disposition, at my disposal. I took a dictionary. This was before Google and the iPhone. I took a dictionary in one pocket and a notebook in the other, and I wrote everything down. I drove people crazy. I asked a lot of questions, and I talked a lot. And I tried to talk as much as I could.
Definitely experiment. Definitely like, let's try this, see if this works. Because honestly, as a language learner and also as having taught some English to Thai people and seeing how Thai people learn English, they want to learn it perfectly before they say it, which makes them a culture that they just don't speak English very well because they don't want to mess up. And if you've ever met a child who's learning their mother language, they don't just come out speaking perfectly. They've got to say just 1 word, 2 words, build a sentence, and it's not perfect. And so that's my philosophy. If you're going to wait till it's perfect, it's pretty hard to learn it. When you mess up and people correct you, then it makes you remember even more. Oh yeah, right, I used to say it like that and that was wrong. And so I think it helps your language learning. That's my opinion.
Another thing I did is I would label things in my house. You know, stove, and I'd write the word for stove, and refrigerator, and, you know, table, and I'd write them and I'd tape the names on them. I just had to do that early on because, you know, pretty soon I knew them. I always carried a couple pictures of my family, or tried to, and explained, okay, here's my mom, here's my dad, because everybody wants to know about your family. They all have families. Oh, do you have family? Or do you have a picture of your family you can show me? And then it was a good conversational piece. So that was another thing I did.
Trying to learn new things. Sometimes I would come with an idea in mind of what I knew I needed to learn. Can you teach me more about adverbs today? Or can you teach me about the imperfect tense or something like that? Sometimes I would come with that, and I also learned songs. So I used music as well because I was a worship leader for my church, and had to memorize songs over and over and over again, new songs just about every week to be able to keep up, and even just to be able to worship from my heart. So music was a big one as well.
Language is learned with people. I think really effective language learners, they might do the groundwork in the classroom or like in individual studies, but I mean, language is about communication, which means you need another person to be talking to. Like, it takes 2 sides. And so just remember that. It's not about making yourself look good, but it's about making relationships and communicating. And one thing I would just add here is just know that it's a way that you can communicate Christ, even if you're not perfect at it. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Like, show humility. It's character building, and change your perspective on how you view language learning. It's uncomfortable. It is.
And then I'd pray. I'd say, God, give me this language. You promised that we'd speak in other tongues. I need this tongue, this Ilocano tongue.